The beast in the dark! Run! That's all Gorak's mind could scream. Not a thought, not a strategy, just the raw, electric impulse to move. The darkness exploded. 12 feet of muscle, bone and rage burst from the shadows the cave bear. Its eyes caught the torchlight, reflected it, turned flame into fury. A demon? No, worse. A real thing, with 100 scars, 1,000 pounds of power and nothing to fear. Behind him, his daughter screamed. Not in surprise, in terror. The kind that lives in your bones, the kind passed down from mothers to babies since the first time humans stood on 2 feet and realized the world was full of things that wanted to eat them. The bear's paw hit like a tree swung by a god. It smashed across Gorak's chest and sent him flying into stone. The impact cracked ribs, shattered breath, his mouth filled with blood, but not fear. He stood, because Gorak was Neanderthal, because his daughter was behind him, because this was not a story of safety. This was survival, every second, every breath. He roared. His hand found the thrusting spear thick as a man's wrist, tipped with hand-napped flint sharp enough to shave with. A weapon born of instinct and ice. The bear charged, and Gorak didn't move. He planted his feet, dug into the cave floor, raised the spear, no tricks, no finesse, just timing, strength, and a will harder than bone. The beast hit. 400 pounds of prehistoric rage, a tidal wave of flesh and fang. The spear bent, screamed, held, then snapped. But not before it found the heart. Not before flint kissed flesh. Not before blood sprayed hot and steaming onto Gorak's chest. The bear collapsed. Its growl ended halfway through a snarl. It twitched once, then died. Gorak collapsed too, 16 broken bones, a punctured lung, wounds that would kill a modern man in an hour. He lived another 30 years. This is what it meant to be Neanderthal. Every hunter boss fight, every winter an apocalypse, every day survival. No second chances, no safety nets, no mercy. They didn't live beside death. They danced with it, slept with it, taught their children to chase it. And they did it for 400,000 years. How? How did a people with no metal, no writing, no wheels hunt creatures the size of buildings? How did they survive when lions with saber teeth stalked their children? How did they outlast the volcanoes, the floods, the winters where the sky disappeared and the air itself tried to kill? And perhaps the biggest mystery of all, why did they vanish? They were stronger than us, tougher than us, more adapted to their world than we will ever be to ours. So why, when we arrived, did they disappear? Were we allies or executioners? This is not the story of cavemen. This is the story of superhumans, people who could survive a bear attack and walk away. People who hunted mammoths with sharpened sticks. People who lived through ice ages we could barely imagine and called them life. They weren't grunting brutes. They weren't slow or stupid or ugly. They were the undisputed champions of the Ice Age. And every story about them starts the same way, with blood. Gorak knew pain. Pain was normal, expected. It told you that you were alive. It meant your body hadn't given up yet. He'd felt worse. A spear to the thigh from a rival clan. A collapsed roof in the middle of winter. The birth of his son, when the wolves were circling the camp and no one had eaten in 2 days. This was just another scar. He spat blood, looked back at the bear, dead, then at his daughter, alive. Good. That was enough. His daughter Lara was only 9, but already she could start a fire. Already she could skin a rabbit with a flint knife and salt the meat so it wouldn't rot. That's what childhood meant when your enemies had claws. There was no waiting for puberty. There was no safety to grow in. By age 5, Neanderthal children had full-sized brains. By 8, they were training to hunt. By 12, they were part of the hunting party. Lara had earned her scars early. And today she had earned her life. Because of her father. Because of a spear. because that's how Neanderthals survived. Together. You want to understand what it meant to be Neanderthal? It meant being hunted, constantly, by lions taller than a man, by hyenas the size of motorcycles, by cold itself. It meant learning to walk on a fractured leg. It meant watching your cousin freeze to death and still going out the next day to look for food. It meant saving your last piece of meat for someone else. Neanderthals weren't primitive. They were precise, brutal, efficient. They were forged by ice and time and pressure. They weren't slow. They had brains the same size as ours, sometimes larger. They made tools, fire, art. They buried their dead. They may have played music, but above all they survived. For 400,000 years they lived in Europe and Asia. They watched glaciers crawl across mountains. They hunted animals now long extinct. They saw the sky turn red with ash after volcanic eruptions, and they adapted. Nothing killed them. Not the cold, not the predators, not starvation. Nothing until us. Because 50,000 years ago, a new kind of human walked into their world. Taller, lighter, with tools made of bone and language that could weave ideas like webs. At first they shared the land. There was no war, no genocide. Not yet. But slowly things changed. The mammoths thinned, the berries stopped growing, the winters grew longer, and the strangers began to spread. What happened next we still don't fully know. Some Neanderthals interbred with them, some tried to fight, some just disappeared, but all of them vanished, except they didn't. Not entirely, because Gorak's strength, Lara's fire-starting hands, the toughness that let them survive a 200-pound predator, it didn't vanish. It became part of us. You, reading this now, if your ancestry traces back to Europe or Asia, you carry them, 1 to 4% of your DNA. Neanderthal, undeniable. It influences how your body responds to infection, how your skin handles sunlight, even how you process emotion, pain, fear. The people who lived in caves and bled for survival are not gone. They're in your cells, in your immune system, in your instincts. This story began with a bear, with a fight, with broken bones and blood and survival. But the real story of Neanderthals isn't just about how they died. It's about how they lived, with power, with pain, with fire, and with love strong enough to die for. That's what Gorak did, and that's what his people did again and again until the world changed around them. This is their story, not a tragedy, not a myth, a legacy. And it all begins here, in the dark, with teeth, with blood, with fire. Ice Age champions. If you saw him from a distance, you might not even recognize him as different. Just a short man standing on a frozen ridge, spear in hand, watching mammoths move like shadows in the mist. But step closer, and everything changes. He's not like you. Not really. He's thicker, broader, denser, built like the earth forged him from the same stone he carves his tools from. A professional wrestler dipped in ice and carved by time. This is a Neanderthal, not a caveman, not a brute, but an apex predator forged by 400,000 years of cold blood and brutal perfection. The average Neanderthal man stood around 5'5", short by modern standards, but the number doesn't matter, because his chest was a barrel massive and wide to house lungs 20% larger than yours. His arms were slabs of meat and tendon, muscle attachments etched into bone like the handle of an axe. His legs were thick, his bones denser than anything you've ever seen. A modern athlete would look like a scarecrow beside him. He didn't just walk across the snow, he moved through it like it wasn't there. Every step balanced, every movement deliberate. A body made to endure what would break you in an hour. Let's break it down. You lose heat through your skin, your fingers, toes, arms, legs. Long limbs bleed warmth. Neanderthals didn't have that problem. Their limbs were short, stocky, less surface area, less heat loss, like a thermos bottle built for war. Their wide noses, not for intimidation. They were high-efficiency air warmers. Breathe in minus 30 degrees air, and those massive nostrils heat it before it hits the lungs. Sinuses expand that warmth. Every breath filtered, conditioned, controlled. Their faces? Projected forward like a bulldog's, not ugly, engineered. That jutting jaw? It shielded teeth from the cold. Those heavy brow ridges? Reinforced beams like the frame of a cathedral? You don't survive 400,000 winters by accident. You do it with design. And they weren't just strong. They were monsters of muscle. Modern humans averaged 29% muscle mass. Neanderthals, between 40 and 45%. Let that sink in. Nearly half their body weight was pure functional power, no supplements, no gyms, just evolution raw and unrelenting. Their bones were 40% thicker. Their femurs were so dense that modern surgical saws can't cut through them without extra blades. Think about that. You can train all you want. Deadlift, sprint, climb, but your skeleton still belongs to a species that adapted for endurance. Theirs was built for war. And yet, it wasn't just about strength. Look at their hands, not clumsy clubs, not blunt tools. They were masterpieces. Thumbs longer and stronger than yours. Fingers thick, yes, but precise. Capable of brutal force and delicate work. Those hands could crush stone and carve eagle talons into jewellery. Skin reindeer hides and paint ochre spirals onto a cave wall. Knock out a saber-toothed predator and maybe, just maybe, play the first flute. They weren't just fighters, they were creators. Now look at the women. Don't imagine fragility, imagine power. The average Neanderthal woman was shorter than her male counterpart. Sure, but only just. Still thick-limbed, still broad-chested, still capable of hunting, fighting, hauling, building. Chemical analysis of their bones tells us the truth. Neanderthal women burned almost as many calories as men. They weren't tending the fire from the sidelines. They were out there tracking reindeer, spearing wild goats, lifting carcasses. They birthed children without hospitals, carried infants across glaciers, fought beside their mates when predators attacked in the night. And they survived, over and over again. Neanderthal mothers needed up to 5,000 calories a day while nursing, twice what modern mothers require. Why? Because their babies grew fast. No soft, sleepy infants. A Neanderthal child reached adult brain size by age 5. By 8, they were learning to kill. By 12, they were hunters. It wasn't just biology. It was necessity. Childhood was compressed into a few brutal years. Every moment was training. Every mistake could mean death. But they didn't just learn to survive. They learned to live. Archaeologists have found toy spears, small carved figures, things that might have been dolls. Even in a world of ice, there was room for play. And then there's pain. A Neanderthal broke bones the way we catch colds, but they didn't just heal, they kept going. Skeletons show multiple fractures, poorly healed, twisted back together by time and will. A man with a shattered leg, still walking. A woman with a crushed arm, still feeding her children. Pain was not a stop sign, it was background noise. One famous skeleton known as Old Man of La Chapelle had no teeth. Yet he lived for years. Someone must have chewed his food, helped him eat, helped him survive. Because for all their strength, they didn't abandon each other. This was their world. Snow that never melted, winds that cut like knives, predators that stalked the dark like ghosts. They didn't fear it. They were built for it. And not just physically. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes larger. Their visual cortex, oversized. Their spatial memory, sharp as a flint blade. They didn't just remember where herds moved, they remembered why, where the snow drifted deepest, where the wind howled loudest, where the bears denned in spring. Their minds were maps drawn in ice and blood, And those minds built tools, not crude clubs, not sticks and stones. They crafted composite weapons, spears with carefully balanced shafts and hand-flaked blades, scrapers made from high-quality flint sourced from miles away, glue made from birch tar created through chemical processes modern humans only rediscovered in the industrial era. This wasn't luck. It wasn't trial and error. It was knowledge, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, for generation after brutal generation. And when they weren't fighting for survival, they were building homes, some from mammoth bones, some dug into cliff faces, some covered in hide so thick they could block an Arctic wind. They slept beside fire, told stories beside fire, passed on myths we will never hear but still feel when we look at cave walls painted in red and black. They didn't just live in nature. They bent it to their will. They weren't adapting to the cold, they were mastering it. And all of it, all of that strength, that genius, that pain, that power worked for 400,000 years, longer than our species has even existed. They didn't need our help. They didn't ask for mercy. They hunted what we fear, endured what we flee from, laughed in the face of extinction again and again. They were Ice Age champions, undisputed, unbroken, until something changed. Not their bodies, not their minds, but the world around them. The cold got colder, the food got scarcer, and something else appeared on the horizon. A new kind of human, taller, thinner, with eyes that didn't remember the ice, and everything began to shift. They were built to survive anything except us. But even in defeat they remain, in your cells, in your bones, in your instincts. That strength isn't gone. It just moved forward, through time, through war, through blood. And it all started here with a body carved by cold and fire, a machine built not in factories, but in frost. They weren't monsters. They weren't myths. They were us. Before we forgot what we were, and in the shadows of their bones maybe we remember. The woman in the cave. She knew she was dying. Not from the fever burning through her veins, not from the cough that racked her chest until blood painted the cave floor. She was dying because she was the last heartbeat of a people, the last flicker of a fire that had burned since the glaciers first kissed the mountains, the last breath of a world no one would remember, but that once ruled everything. Outside, snow fell on the cliffs of Gibraltar. It had always snowed this time of year. But this winter was different. There was no smoke from nearby hearths, no laughter of children learning to shape flint, no songs whispered beside the fire, no footsteps in the snow, just silence. And her. For 1,000 generations this cave had been home. Its walls held stories older than memory, deer painted in ochre, symbols etched by fingernails, tracking the seasons, the herds, the stars. Here her grandmother had taught her to read the wind, to see danger in the way the birds flew, to hear the language in silence. Now the silence said one thing: gone, her daughters, taken by the same fever now devouring her, her sisters, lost to the storm, chasing herds that never returned, the men dead beneath ice, or vanished across the sea. Only she remained. She pressed her hand to the wall, felt the grooves carved by hands long turned to dust. Here her people had lived, loved, bled, died. Now she was the last to touch it. But this is not where the story ends, because stories, real stories, the ones carved into the bone, written into blood, never end. 3 weeks before she closed her eyes, strangers passed through the valley, tall, slim, with long limbs and strange eyes that scanned the horizon like it was unfamiliar. Among them walked a young woman, dark hair, quick hands, curious in a way that was both ancient and entirely new. She didn't know it, but her grandmother had been different, stockier, stronger, with a gaze that held something primal, something old, and in her blood, a secret, a gift. a flicker of a dying people that refused to die. Because when the last Neanderthal woman laid down to sleep for the final time, she did not vanish. She became us. Today, if your roots reach back to Europe, to Asia, to the frozen corners of the earth, you carry her. 1 to 4% of your DNA is hers, etched into every cell, silent, permanent, undeniable. She influences how you fight disease, how your skin responds to sun, how your brain feels pain, even how you dream. You may not know her name, but your body does. She wasn't a footnote. She wasn't an anomaly. She was the final ember of a fire that once lit the world, and though her bones crumbled into dust, her legacy refused to. Because legacies don't live in stone, they live in blood, in breath, in the parts of you that remember what your mind has forgotten. She wasn't old by our standards, 42 winters, but she'd buried everyone she ever loved. The fever came fast, took the strong first, the children next. The sea gave no fish, the ground no roots, the sky no mercy. And so she waited. No one will ever know her name, but science gave her one, a code, a number, a place. But she was more than that. She was a hunter, a mother, a storyteller, a survivor of a species that had survived everything. Saber-toothed cats, volcanic winters, hyenas that stood taller than your shoulder. She had stared them all down and lived. But this silence, this isolation, this was a predator she could not fight. She didn't rage. She didn't cry. She carved. With the last of her strength, she etched new symbols into the wall. Not for herself, for no one in particular, just to leave something behind. Proof that she had been here, that they had been here, that once there was a people who lived and loved and lasted, not because of weapons, not because of war, because of fire, because of loyalty, because of each other. They buried their dead, laid flowers with the bones, wove rituals into the dirt. They healed the wounded, cared for the broken, held the old close when they could no longer walk. They were not animals, they were family. The El Cidron family, found in a Spanish cave, proved it. 13 Neanderthals, men, women, children, a baby, all related, all killed together. But they didn't die alone. Their bones were tangled, mothers shielding children, brothers near the entrance defending to the end. They lived as one. They died as one. So did she. Even alone, she was never really alone. Because we're still telling her story. Scientists used to think Neanderthals were primitive, grunting cavemen, dumb muscle with stone tools. They were wrong, painfully wrong. She had a brain as large as ours, maybe larger. She knew how to trap fire, how to carve tools with such precision they still cut flesh today. She knew what herbs soothed burns, what berries killed, what roots cured fever. She remembered the shape of the stars, where the herds migrated, when the snow would fall. She taught her daughters taught theirs. And that chain lasted 400,000 years, until it reached her. But here's the truth. That chain never broke. It just changed. It merged. The moment that tall stranger's blood mixed with her granddaughter's, a new chapter began, not an ending, a transformation. We didn't just replace Neanderthals. We became them. Every time you light a fire, every time you fight off an illness without knowing how, every time you look at a cave painting and feel something stir in your chest, that's her. Every time your lungs burn with cold air and push harder, every time your fingers curl around a stone instinctively, every time you make something with your hands and feel the shape of it matter more than the words, that's her. Not gone, never gone. Just waiting to be remembered. And in that cave, 28,000 years ago, with the snow piling outside, with her lungs gasping, with her fingers raw from carving stone, she didn't fear death. She'd seen it too often to fear it. What she feared, what she mourned, was silence. The silence of no footsteps, No fire crackling, no child's voice echoing off the stone. She wasn't mourning her own life. She was mourning a world. But she was wrong. Because the world didn't end. It shifted. And in that shift, her people became part of the next. The way roots feed new branches. The way stars burn out but their light travels forever. You're made of many things. History, evolution, chance. But somewhere deep in the spiral of your DNA, you are also made of her. You are the breath she lost, the child she never raised, the future she never saw, but hoped for. This is not a story about extinction. It's a story about memory, about endurance, about a woman in a cave who didn't give up, didn't surrender, and left behind a gift no one understood until now, the gift of us. We are them. It's in your blood. You can't see it. You don't feel it. But it's there written in the code of your body like a whisper from 40,000 years ago. A whisper that says, you are not alone. Because if you're of European, Asian, or Native American descent, you carry the ghosts of the Ice Age inside you. Not as memory, as biology. You're not just human. You're also Neanderthal. It began with a spark, not fire, not violence, but a glance, a touch, a shared shelter from the storm. Two species so different, so alike met beneath the northern stars. Homo sapiens, the newcomers. Neanderthals, the champions of cold. They should have been enemies, predators competing for the same dwindling prey. But something unexpected happened. They chose each other. Not just once, not in some one-off tryst forgotten in time, but again and again across continents, across centuries. Their children weren't monsters. They were us. Today, in every cell of your body, remnants of their DNA still fire commands. In the way you fight infection, in how you sleep, in how you digest fat, even in the way you respond to pain. The Neanderthal within you isn't myth, it's mechanism. That stubborn gene that keeps you awake late into the night, that's them. The part of your immune system that reacts faster to certain viruses, them again. The way your skin burns slower in northern sun, thank the Ice Age. The Neanderthals who lived through volcanic winters and blizzards that froze bone didn't just pass on survival stories. They passed on tools, biological weapons, upgrades forged in suffering. And now, those ancient adaptations still run beneath your skin like fire in the wires. We used to believe Neanderthals vanished, that they were wiped out by war, by weather, by us. But the truth is stranger. They didn't disappear. They merged. Their bodies broke, but their blueprint endured. They became us, and in doing so, they became immortal. Their skulls were different. Brow ridges like armour. Brains slightly larger, not in smarts, but in structure. More surface area in regions connected to movement, to senses, to emotion. Not brutish, not simple, tuned, to survival, to family, to ice. Today MRI scans of modern humans show something remarkable. In some of us, those ancient brain patterns still echo. Subtle shifts in how we react to sound, to fear, to pain. Old instincts rising like smoke from ancestral flame. You flinch at a low growl. You feel at home near fire. You dream of hunting something bigger than yourself. You don't know why, but your blood does. They weren't just brawlers. They were engineers. They understood how to shape the world. Tools made with obsessive care, flakes of flint honed sharper than steel, spears perfectly balanced to strike through fur and bone. They created tar, the world's first glue, 200,000 years ago, without pots, without thermometers, just fire, wood, patience, and genius. Their fingerprints are still visible on these ancient relics, pressed into tools buried beneath layers of ash, pressed into us. Because some of us still feel that drive to shape, to craft, to hold something in our hands and make it useful. That's not modern instinct, that's memory. Neanderthals hunted like wolves. They moved as one. trapped mammoths in valleys carved by glacier and time. They mapped herds over generations, used the terrain like a second weapon. You think strategy is a modern invention? They invented it. Archaeological digs show coordinated kills, synchronized ambushes, escape routes, contingency plans, battlefields, engineered in ice. They didn't stumble into greatness. They earned it. Their strength was legendary. Bones like iron beams, muscle packed thick around dense frames, hands that could crush stone, and yet they made jewellery, delicate, intricate, eagle talons strung into necklaces, shells painted with red ochre, not for survival, for meaning. They understood beauty art, symbolism. This wasn't brute strength, this was humanity. You inherited more than their blood, you inherited their resilience. The part of you that refuses to quit, that clenches its jaw when pain sets in, that shows up the day after heartbreak, after sickness, after loss, that's them, that's what endured. Because Neanderthals weren't built for ease, they were built for resistance, and so are you. In times of crisis, when your body breaks, when the world burns, when everything in you says stop, you hear a voice. Low, gravelled, ancient, a whisper beneath your heartbeat. Keep going. That voice doesn't come from your mind. It comes from your lineage. You survived because they did. You are not soft. You are not weak. You are the product of 400,000 years of defiance. There are clues in our dreams. Have you ever stood in a vast forest in your sleep, felt cold air bite your lungs and known exactly what to do? Climbed a mountain you've never seen and felt home? That's the map they left behind. Somewhere deep in your limbic system you still carry Ice Age coordinates, still know the sound of sabres in the dark, still flinch at shadows because once those shadows held claws. You still respond to firelight as more than warmth. It means safety, it means gathering, it means stories. Every time we tell the story of who we are, we begin too late. We start with cities, with pyramids, with bronze and Incan lore. But it started long before that. It started when a mother carved a spiral into a stone and handed it to her child. When a father taught his son where the mammoth would cross in spring. When two species met in the snow and instead of fighting they touched. That's where we begin. You're not a product of modernity. You're a survival machine wearing genes. You're firelight and bone memory. You're forged from hunger, grief, laughter, and mammoth fat. Every success you've had, you owe to someone who survived an ice age before there were words. You carry their struggle, their stubbornness, their ability to endure and adapt and overcome not just for themselves, but for you. We are not alone in the mirror. Behind your eyes is a story written by blood, not ink. Stone, not silicon. The next time you feel overwhelmed, the next time your heart breaks, the next time the world feels too big and you too small, remember this. You were built by giants, not in height, in heart. You don't need to become strong. You already are, because once, in a cave beneath a cliff, a woman breathed her last breath and passed her strength to you. We say Neanderthals are extinct, but we're wrong. Every time your skin heals, every time you push through pain, every time you fall and rise again, that's not evolution. That's inheritance. You are not their descendant. You are their echo, and you are still ringing. Childhood in the frozen world. The baby was born in the dark, not silence. The cave echoed with a breathing shallow, sharp, urgent. The mother grunted, one hand gripping the stone wall, the other clutching dry grass. Aunties circled, murmuring. A grandmother crouched, her fingers stained with ochre, now red with something else. Then came the cry, high, piercing the sound of defiance against the cold. The firelight flickered. The wind howled outside. But inside that cave, something ancient had just arrived. A child of the Ice Age. Childhood, as we know it, didn't exist. No lullabies, no cartoons, no playgrounds. Only survival. And it began the moment the cord was cut. a Neanderthal child entered a world colder than we can imagine, a world of ice, fire, predators and hunger, and from day one their bodies began transforming to meet the storm. By age 5, their brains were fully grown. By 8, they were mimicking spear throws. By 12, they were hunting mammoth. There was no teenage phase, no waiting until they were ready. They were ready, or they died. It wasn't cruel. It was the contract every Neanderthal signed at birth. Their bodies developed like small tanks, broad chests, thick wrists, heavy bones that could withstand falls, cold and violence. Chemical analysis of ancient skeletons shows a level of activity that would exhaust elite athletes today. These weren't passive children. They moved more, lifted more, endured more than we ask of our strongest adults. A modern 10-year-old trains with video games. A Neanderthal 10-year-old trained with stone. Their toys were tools, miniature spears carved from bone, small slings, flint fragments, leather cords. We found them buried in dust, left beside children who didn't survive the winter, symbols of play or preparation, maybe both. Imagine a child gripping a wooden point and copying her father's stance not to impress him, but because one day she'd stand between her family and a bear. The average lifespan of a Neanderthal, 30 to 40 years if you were lucky, and many never made it past childhood. In Shanida Cave, Iraq, the remains of a Neanderthal child were found beneath a thin layer of pollen, buried with care, laid in a grave surrounded by flowers, yarrow, cornflowers, hollyhock. It wasn't survival, it was love. Even in a world where life was short, loss still lingered. They grew fast, but not alone. Neanderthal children were raised by clans, not parents. 1 mother, 5 mothers, 2 fathers, 7 uncles, everyone taught, everyone fed, everyone protected. We see it in the bones. A child with a malformed leg. Shouldn't have survived past 3, but he lived to 10, fed, carried, cared for. That means something. At the El Sidran site in Spain, scientists uncovered the remains of 13 Neanderthals, a family massacred in a cave 49,000 years ago. Among them were children. One had severe tooth decay and abscess so painful it would have made eating torture. And yet his bones show he was well fed. Someone was chewing food for him. Someone was sacrificing for him. That's not instinct. That's compassion. Growing up meant watching death early, watching a sibling vanish into a snowstorm, a cousin trampled by panicked prey, a friend dragged into the dark by a cat with saber teeth. There was no sheltering, no pretending. The world bared its teeth and the children had to match them. Every injury was a lesson, every hunt a test. Yet they laughed. Archaeologists have found what they believe to be carved dolls, small humanoid figures tucked near hearths, some with scratched faces, others shaped into animals. The urge to imagine, to create stories, began not with books, but with bone and fire. Maybe a child carved a little lion and made it pounce across mammoth hide. Maybe another used it to scare his sister. Even in hardship they played, not because they were children, because they were human. Language? We don't know for sure. Their throat bones hint at speech, not grunts, but words, not whispers, but songs. The FOXP2 gene, critical for language in us, is present in them. Maybe not Shakespeare, but certainly stories. Imagine a mother telling her children about the mammoth hunt, about the star that marks summer, about the grandmother who walked into the ice and never came back, but still watches them in the flames. Language didn't begin in cities. It began in caves. Discipline was brutal, not in punishment but in demand. A single misstep on the hunt could mean death for the entire group. One bad choice, one moment of weakness, and the bear's claws found your throat. That's what they were taught. Responsibility didn't come at 18, it came at 8, at 6. At birth you didn't grow into it. You were grown by it. Their education wasn't lectures. It was immersion. Want to learn to kill a reindeer? Watch your aunt slice one open. Want to know when the ice will crack? Listen to your grandfather's footsteps. Want to know how to survive the storm? sleep beside the fire and feel the wind shift. Lessons passed not in writing but in watching. We call them primitive, but they raised children who could kill mammoths before puberty. That's not primitive, that's elite. Their childhoods were brief, but rich. They knew the smell of pine sap in snow, the feel of a mammoth's fur between their fingers, the sound of flint tapping bone, shaping something useful, the sting of frostbite, the ache of hunger, the warmth of a fire built by a father's calloused hands. They weren't innocent, they were aware, and through that awareness, they were strong. We raise children to find themselves. They raise children to remember themselves, to embody the tribe, the history, the scars. Every child was an archive. Every child a carrier of stories, of muscle memory, of songs that had no words. They weren't built for safety, they were built for continuity. One life ends, another rises, already holding the torch. You've met them, in your daughter who refuses to quit, in your son who learns faster than he should, in that quiet moment when your child sits too close to the fire, watching it flicker like it's speaking only to them. You've seen echoes of them in tiny hands holding sharp tools, in scraped knees that don't cry, in eyes that study storms without fear. They're still here. We think childhood should be soft. They knew it had to be sharp, not cruel, not joyless, but shaped by the real. And through that sharpening came resilience not of body but of spirit. In the dark, a girl sleeps beside her mother. Her legs are sore from the chase. Her fingers ache from gripping flint. Her stomach grumbles. But in her dreams, she's hunting. Not because she has to, because she can. Because that's what being a Neanderthal child meant. Born into fire, forged in frost, ready for anything. The family that wouldn't let go. The cave was silent. No birds, no footsteps. Only the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. Beneath the stone ceiling of El Sidron in the cold belly of northern Spain, 13 bodies waited. They had waited for 49,000 years. The bones lay tangled, a teenager's femur across a woman's ribs, a child's skull tucked near an adult's shattered hand, fragments of lives frozen in the position of their final moments. At first glance, they looked like just another group of prehistoric remains, victims of time, forgotten hunters buried by collapse. But then the scientists started to look closer, and what they found changed everything. Their names are lost to us. No language survives to tell who they were, the boy with the damaged teeth, the man with the torn shoulder, the infant who never learned to walk. But DNA remembers. In 2010, geneticist Carl Lalloisa-Fox sequenced the ancient material scraped from their bones and uncovered something staggering. These weren't strangers. They were family. All 7 males, from grown men to young boys, shared the same mitochondrial DNA. That means they came from the same maternal line, brothers, uncles, nephews, sons. The adult women? Each carried a different mitochondrial signature. They had come from somewhere else. It was a social system modern anthropologists call patriarchality. The men stayed put. The women joined from other clans. Like a prehistoric photograph, the DNA painted a picture of an extended family unit, stable, connected, cohesive, not wandering loners. But homebound bloodlines, they had survived together, and they had died together. The bones showed something more than time. There were cut marks, deep, sharp, deliberate. Not just from tool making or scavenging, but from butchery. Their flesh had been removed, marrow sucked from cracked femurs, skulls fractured to get at the brains inside. This wasn't ritual, this wasn't burial. This was cannibalism, not myth, not story, science. The patterns of damage matched what we see when Neanderthals processed deer or horse carcasses, but here the meat was human. The El Sidron family had been eaten. By whom? No one knows. It may have been enemies, another Neanderthal clan pushed to desperation, or perhaps a faction splintered from within, a betrayal born from starvation. Because that too is in the bones, signs of chronic malnutrition, teeth with grooves and interruptions, stop-start growth caused by repeated famine, bones that tell of bodies pushed to the edge over and over again. Even before they died, the Elcedron family had been suffering. But what makes this story unforgettable isn't how they died. It's how they lived. One teenager had a tooth abscess so painful it would have made eating impossible. But he wasn't starved. His body was nourished. Someone had been mashing food for him, preparing meals soft enough for a mouth racked with pain. That's care, that's love. One man had a shattered shoulder, an injury that never healed properly. He wouldn't have been able to throw a spear, would have struggled to lift anything heavy. In a world that ran on hunting and hauling, he should have been left behind. But his bones told another story. He was just as well fed as the others. The clan didn't discard him. They carried him. When the end came, the bones were found in clusters, the children close to the women, as if they had been held, shielded, the men near the entrance, positioned where someone would take a stand. Maybe they fought, maybe they tried to escape, but they didn't leave each other. They didn't run. Their deaths were brutal, but their bonds were unbreakable. We often imagine Neanderthals as solitary brutish creatures roaming in small, grunting bands with no deeper ties. But the Elcedron cave disproves that forever. They were a clan. They were a family. They had structure, ritual, memory, and most of all, they had each other. Somewhere, long before that last terrible day, a child laughed beside a fire. His uncle showed him how to carve antler. His aunt wrapped him in a hide warmed by her own body heat. His cousin raced him to the stream. They grew up together, starved together, fought together. They didn't just share space. They shared identity. Elcedron is a grave. But it's also a mirror, because what we see in those bones is something deeply human. Not just violence, not just extinction, but devotion. Even in the worst moments, even in the hunger, the cold, the terror, they stayed. They didn't abandon the weak. They didn't divide to save themselves. They faced death as they faced life. Together. There's a kind of immortality in that, because while we don't know their names, don't know their language, don't know their dreams, we know them. We felt what they felt. Every time you hold your sibling's hand in a crisis, every time your family huddles under a blanket during a storm, every time you choose someone else's well-being over your own, you're remembering them. Their story might have ended in blood, but it began with loyalty. A baby born into a firelit cave, a grandmother humming while boiling marrow, a father teaching his niece to spot paw tracks in the snow. They lived fully, they loved completely, and they died as one. In that, they were not Neanderthal. They were family. Today, the Elcedron cave is silent once more, but beneath its stones sleeps a record of connection too deep for words. When the archaeologists cleared the last of the soil, they didn't find warriors. They didn't find savages. They found us keepers of the flame. The fire never went out, through winters that froze rivers solid, through storms that collapsed trees, through famine and flood and the silence of extinction. It burned. Not for a day, not for a year, but for 3 centuries, and around it life happened. Children were born, grandfathers died, stories were whispered, skins were tanned, meat was roasted, wounds were soothed. This was Abri Romani, a cave in what is now northeastern Spain. But back then, it was something more, a stronghold, a womb, a world held together by firelight. Fire was not a discovery. It was an inheritance passed down through generations like a sacred rite, from one hand to the next, like a beating heart made of flame. Modern humans think of fire as a tool. Neanderthals treated it as family, because when you live in a world that wants you dead, where snow blinds your eyes, where bears stalk your children, where warmth is the rarest resource of all, The flame is not optional. It is everything. At Abri-Romani, archaeologists uncovered over 200 hearths, layered one atop the other like pages in a book made of ash. Each fire pit was placed with care, each stone arranged for purpose. Some were large and communal great bonfires that could warm 30 people at once. Others were smaller, intimate, sleeping fires positioned beside where a body might rest. Little islands of heat in the frozen dark. They weren't scattered. They were organised cooking fires sat near cave mouths, where smoke could rise and escape. Sleeping fires lined the walls, tucked close to the windbreak. Tool-making fires stood near work areas, flint scatterings beside singed bones. This wasn't primitive. It was planned. They weren't just surviving in the Ice Age. They were building systems. But the miracle wasn't just the placement. It was the continuity. For 300 straight years, through shifts in climate, population and danger, the flame never died. That means someone always stayed behind to tend it. Someone always rose at midnight to feed the coals. Someone always remembered which branch burned long, which sparked too fast. The fire was trust made visible. You don't guard something for 300 years unless it matters more than life. They fed it with pine when the forest was thick, with bones when the trees gave nothing, with dry grass when all else failed, because the fire wasn't just warmth, it was identity. It was the center of their universe. Imagine a mother placing her newborn beside a sleeping fire, the red glow flickering over the baby's face, the breath of generations warming her child's skin. Imagine a grandmother teaching a girl which wood burns fastest, which bark makes the least smoke, how to bank the coals so they survive the night. This wasn't instinct. This was knowledge. This was science. At Kesem Cave in Israel, the evidence gets even more staggering. 400,000 years ago, long before agriculture, long before the wheel Neanderthals had built thermal zones inside caves, hot zones, warm zones, cool zones. They used fire to engineer indoor climates, 500 degrees Fahrenheit for cooking, 200 degrees Fahrenheit for sleeping, cold pockets near the walls for food storage. They weren't just using fire, they were controlling it with a sophistication we didn't match again until the Industrial Revolution. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, another surprise. Birch tar, a sticky black adhesive, stronger than anything nature provides, used for hafting stone points to wooden spears. Made through a process that requires chemistry, birch bark must be heated with oxygen. Not too hot or it burns, not too cool or it won't extract. The sweet spot? Between 340 degrees Fahrenheit and 400 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. That's a temperature range harder to maintain than most modern ovens. And Neanderthals did it 200,000 years ago without pots, without thermometers, without any of the tools we consider essential. They made glue out of trees, with nothing but flame and brilliance. The fire wasn't just heat, it was technology. It changed the food they ate. Cooked meat meant more calories, less chewing, fewer gut parasites. Roasted tubes released starches for quick energy. That extra energy didn't go to bigger stomachs. It went to brains. The cooking revolution didn't start in a kitchen. It started in a cave beside a woman watching mammoth fat melt off a bone. Every meal wasn't just sustenance, it was evolution. And fire made it possible. But beyond the warmth, beyond the calories, beyond the glue and roasted meat, there was something else fire gave. Connection. Abri-Romani wasn't just a shelter. It was a university beside the flames, knowledge passed from old to young. Fathers showed sons how to read animal tracks in smoke. Mothers taught daughters when to stoke the coals. Children carved toys by firelight, played shadow games on the walls, listened to legends maybe sung, maybe whispered of giants, hunts and spirits in the snow. Fire was their library, their TV, their language. And when they died, they left the fires burning. In cave after cave across Europe and the Levant, the pattern is the same. Final hearths aren't messy. They're perfect, neatly arranged, well fed, still warm when the people vanished. They didn't forget how to make fire. They lost the world that gave it meaning. Today we flip a switch. Microwaves hum, electric heat glows behind glass. But something in us remembers. That moment in a cave when someone leaned forward, blew gently on embers and lit a future. You felt it, camping in the woods, watching the flames dance, losing yourself in the rhythm of orange and red. That pull, that peace, it's not nostalgia, it's inheritance. Because long before we were builders, before we were kings, before we were anything, we were firekeepers. In every Neanderthal hearth, there's a story. A mother warming her son's hands, a hunter sealing a wound with a hot stone, an elder teaching her great-granddaughter which way the wind bends a flame. They weren't primitives, they were engineers of light. And for 300 years in one dark cave their flame never died. The first chemists. It starts with a fire, not a wildfire, not lightning on dry grass, but a fire made on purpose, a fire fed and watched, adjusted, protected, not just for heat, not just for meat, but for alchemy. A roll of bark, a flat stone, a tight seal of earth and ash, and patience. Because if the temperature gets too high, it burns. Too low, and nothing happens. But just right, just steady, and the black tar begins to form. It bubbles, it oozes, it cools to a thick, sticky glue that can bind stone to wood. This is birch tar, one of humanity's oldest synthetic substances, and it didn't come from a lab. It came from the mind of a Neanderthal, 200,000 years ago. Let that sink in. 200 millennia before humans invented pottery, before metal tools, before even language as we know it. Someone somewhere figured out that you could take bark from a tree and with just the right heat in just the right conditions, create a powerful adhesive. And they didn't just do it once. They did it again and again. Across Europe, from Italy to Germany, archaeologists have found traces of birch tar on Neanderthal tools. Microscopic analysis shows flint blades affixed to handles with this dark resin. Some even show fingerprints embedded in the cooled tar. A signature of sorts. Proof that this wasn't luck. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional manufacturing. This was chemistry. Modern scientists tried to replicate it. They assumed it would be easy. Just throw some bark in a fire, right? Wrong. It took months of experimentation before they succeeded, and only when they built sealed, oxygen-poor chambers and maintained a consistent temperature range of 340 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. Too hot, and the bark combusted. Too cool, and it just baked. But Neanderthals got it right. Without thermometers, without clay pots, without even written instructions. They did it blind, and they did it perfectly. So what does that mean? It means we've been underestimating them. For decades, Neanderthals were painted as dumb brutes, club-swinging cavemen with more biceps than brains. But the evidence tells another story, a story of precision planning, pattern recognition. Because birch tar isn't just a clever trick, it's a chemical achievement that demands complex thinking, anticipating results, adjusting variables, learning through failure. It means they weren't just using the world, they were shaping it. And tar was just the beginning. Step into a Neanderthal cave and look closer. You'll see a space designed with intent, sleeping areas arranged along heat gradients, workstations clustered around the best light, cooking fires placed to vent smoke away from vulnerable lungs. They weren't random, they were organized. In France's Abri Romani cave, archaeologists found over 200 hearths each, precisely placed and layered across generations. Some were massive, large enough to warm entire clans. Others were small and personal, sleeping fires made just big enough to keep a body from freezing. Their placement was not scattered or chaotic. It followed a logic. Warmth here, storage there, tools along the wall. Even without walls or doors, they created rooms. Fire was not just heat, it was a zoning tool. They were turning natural caves into engineered spaces. At Kesem Cave in Israel, the sophistication goes even further. There, 400,000-year-old hearths show temperature zoning within a single living area. Hot zones near the flames for roasting. Warm zones a few feet away for sleeping. Cool zones at the edges perfect for storing meat. They didn't just light a fire. They designed their environment around it. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional architecture. It meant understanding heat distribution. It meant observing airflow. It meant planning for comfort, safety, and survival. No blueprints, no measurements. Just memory, intuition, and teaching passed from one scarred hand to the next. It wasn't primitive. It was genius in the shadows. And that genius didn't end with heat and glue. Neanderthals made tools so sharp they rival modern surgical scalpels. They carved with flint so precisely they could shape bones into needles. They crafted spear points, scrapers, and pressure flakers instruments so effective that early Homo sapiens adopted them wholesale. They weren't copying us. We were copying them. Their bodies were strong, but their minds were stronger than we gave them credit for. They observed patterns in animals, tracked seasonal migrations, predicted weather from cloud shapes and wind shifts. They understood that certain rocks sparked fire, that others broke with predictability. They understood leverage, friction, timing, not in words, but in outcomes. They were builders, hunters, doctors, and yes, chemists. Think of the implications. To make birch tar, you need an understanding of heat control, an enclosed container likely made of stone and mud, the ability to seal it without air, knowledge that the transformation happens without seeing it happen, faith that what emerges hours later will be useful. This isn't trial and error. This is engineering. And when that tar cooled, they didn't waste it. They used it to attach flint blades to spears, bind knives to antler handles, seal cracks in wood, even repair broken tools. They weren't just surviving the Ice Age. They were innovating through it. Pop culture got it wrong. These weren't hunched, drooling brutes grunting at the moon. They were thinkers, planners, tinkerers. Imagine a group of them sitting around a fire, not just eating but experimenting, adding bark, sealing pits, checking residue. One crouches, runs a finger over cooled tar, licks it, grins, tries to stick a stone to wood. And it holds. The others lean in. History shifts. You know this feeling, that spark, that moment when an idea turns into utility. It's what built the pyramids, split the atom, launched satellites. But before any of that, before history was written, a Neanderthal burned bark in the dark and made glue. The fingerprints left behind in that tar, they're not just evidence. They're a signature, a sign that someone, somewhere, was reaching forward across time, trying to fix something, improve something, make it last. They were more like us than we ever imagined, and in some ways better, because they did it without books, without wheels, without metallurgy or cities or even speech as we understand it. Just intelligence passed hand to hand through smoke and shadow. When we talk about the first chemists, we picture robes and scrolls, alchemists in stone towers distilling dreams from vapour. But the truth is humbler, older, more powerful. The first chemist crouched beside a fire in a freezing cave, held bark over coals, watched, waited, and created something new. Not magic, mastery. The mammoth killers. The herd moved like thunder. 43 mammoths, marching across the frozen plain, their breath fogging the morning air in long steaming clouds. Calves the size of horses huddled between legs thick as columns. Their footsteps crushed ice, snapped ancient roots, reshaped the very earth they walked upon, and Gaul watched. He lay belly down on a rocky ridge, cloaked in musk and stillness, eyes locked on the matriarch, the massive female with the broken left tusk. He knew her, had known her for years. She always paused at the 3 stones shaped like knuckles, always crossed the stream just south of the cliff face, always hesitated just long enough before entering the defile. Beside him, 11 hunters waited in silence. Some were barely more than children. Others bore the scars of 100 hunts. None of them moved. None of them needed to. They had already seen it in their minds. This was not chaos. This was choreography. Gaul was 35, old for a hunter. His hair had turned iron grey at the temples. A deep cut above his brow never quite healed right. His spear hand had swollen twice from infection, and yet he moved with the calm certainty of a tactician. The young bull, limping, rear leg dragging slightly, probably a lion wound, maybe a hidden abscess. It didn't matter. He wouldn't make it through the ambush. Gaul gave the signal just a low grunt, almost lost to the wind, and the hunters began to move. This wasn't a wild charge. It wasn't frenzy. It was strategy. Their fathers had taught them this ground. Their grandfathers had shaped it. Generations of Neanderthals had prepared the valley for this moment. Hidden pits carved into the frost-hardened soil, spears cached beneath bark, thorns positioned to steer the herd. Every step of the land was a page from an ancient playbook written not with ink, but blood. And the final act was about to begin. The young bull limped into the defile. The matriarch hesitated, eyes flicking, trunk testing the air, but the cold and the wind masked the scent of danger. Then the fire came. Ella and Mora burst from cover, torches held high, shouting with voices made for echo and fear. The herd panicked, bolting forward, thundering toward the narrow pass, but the young bull, slower, wounded, confused, lagged behind. Isolated. That was the plan, always the plan. Modern scientists didn't believe it at first. They assumed mammoth kills were lucky, ambushes gone right, coincidence. Then they found the patterns. At Spy Cave in Belgium, 35 mammoth skeletons, all pierced between the ribs, all from below. At La Côte de Saint-Brelade, an entire herd driven off a cliff, the kill site still stained with bone and ivory. This wasn't luck. This was knowledge. This was science. You don't throw a spear at a mammoth unless you know exactly where to aim. You don't hide in a pit beneath 1-ton feet unless you're certain the herd will pass over you, not around you. You don't drive 1,000 pounds of fur and fury into a trap unless you've read every movement of the land, every twitch of the wind. And Gaul had read it all. As the wounded bull entered the kill zone, he turned. Too late. Gaul emerged from the shadows low and fast. One thrust. A flint blade shaped like a surgeon's scalpel struck between ribs, straight to the heart. The mammoth bellowed a scream that shook snow from the cliffs, then staggered. Another spear flew, then another. Blood geysered from the trunk. The bull took one step forward and collapsed. A mountain of meat and memory. The hunters fell silent. Then came the shout. Not joy. Thanks. They didn't waste anything. 3,600 pounds of meat. 400 pounds of pure fat. Hide thicker than armour. Bones strong enough to build shelters. Sinew turned to thread. Ivory carved into ornaments, needles, tools. A mammoth kill meant survival for weeks. It meant warmth. It meant rest. It meant life. Archaeologists studying these kills are astonished. The entry angles of spear wounds show they were thrown from below, meaning Neanderthals got within striking distance, sometimes even beneath the mammoths, to drive the point upward into the vital organs. That's not just bravery. That's trust in timing, in teammates, in memory. Because the land was a map passed on not in stories, but in footsteps retraced. This is where the mammoth limped last year. This is where the stream freezes thin. This is where we plant the pit. This is where we wait. The mammoth wasn't just food, it was a rite of passage. At 14, young Tar had never faced one before. Now he stood beside its cooling body, blood on his hands, eyes wide. Gaul clapped him on the back. Not a word spoken. He didn't need one. He was a hunter now. The meat was cooked over oak for slow heat, the marrow drawn from shattered bones, shared with the children first, the fat rendered and stored, mixed with dried berries and powdered meat pemmican, the fuel of winter. The ivory, some of it carved that very night, a flute shaped for the hands of a child. Because music mattered too. This wasn't just killing. This was a civilization built around the hunt. It required coordinated movement across miles of terrain, observation of animal behavior over years, engineering of traps and kill zones, psychological manipulation, panic, isolation, entrapment, physical strength. Yes, but more than that, intellectual mastery. These weren't apes with spears. These were generals. Think about the cost of failure. A misstep could mean trampled bodies. A missed spear, a wasted opportunity, a wounded hunter, a death sentence when infection set in. And yet they did it, again and again, because they understood risk. They understood reward. And they understood math, though they never called it that. How much food could a herd provide? How long would it last? How many mouths to feed? How far to travel? Every decision balanced survival against danger. And the math had to be right. Mammoth hunting wasn't an act of desperation. It was an expression of dominance. Proof that Neanderthals weren't scraping by. They were thriving. They turned one of the world's largest land animals into predictable prey. That doesn't happen by chance. That's the result of centuries of accumulated knowledge encoded not in books, but in bones. We often imagine Neanderthals as chasing mammoths with crude tools, hoping for luck. But the truth? They studied them, understood their paths, predicted their behavior, exploited their weaknesses. Modern biologists struggle to map migratory behavior across changing landscapes. Neanderthals did it with no satellites, just memory, sky, wind, stone. And when the kill was done, they sat together around the fire, not to celebrate, but to honour. The flame rose, the meat hissed, and in the smoke the story of the hunt rose like a ghost. One more success, one more day, one more victory against the dying cold. The mammoth was not just a beast. It was a mirror. What we see in its reflection is not savagery but strategy, not fear but focus, not chaos but choreography. Gaul's band didn't just kill a mammoth. They executed a plan that took years to perfect. They were warriors. But more than that, they were scientists in fur and ash, music, art and the soul. The wind howled outside the cave like some ancient spirit denied a voice. Inside, it was still. Just the crackling of the fire, the rhythmic sound of breath, the quiet tap of stone against talon. A man, wide-shouldered, thick-fingered, held the claw of an eagle in one hand, and with the other gently scraped it with flint. Not for a tool, not for survival, but for something else. For beauty, for meaning, for art. We've always imagined Neanderthals as brutes, strong but stupid, survivors but not thinkers, beasts who lived in darkness, who grunted and hunted and died. But the bones tell another story. So do the claws, and the feathers, and the red ochre, and the tiny hollow bones turned into flutes. This wasn't just a species that lived through the Ice Age. It was a species that sang through it. Start with the eagle talons. They're found at sites from Croatia to France, always the same, perforated at precise points, scraped and polished, arranged in ways that suggest necklaces, pendants, maybe even ceremonial wear. Why eagle talons? Because they were rare, dangerous to acquire, and unmistakably powerful in symbolism. You don't wear the claw of a predator unless you want to say something. Something about strength, something about connection, something about identity. Modern humans didn't invent jewelry. Neanderthals did 130,000 years ago, long before we painted Lascaux. Long before pyramids, before writing, before gods. They were adorning themselves. They were marking their place in the world. Not just a live scene. Then there's the ochre, red as blood, yellow as sun, black as night. Found in powdered form at dozens of Neanderthal sites, ground in bowls of stone mixed with fat or marrow, applied to skin, tools, bones. Sometimes it marks burials, sometimes it's smeared on walls, sometimes it's just there. Which is exactly the point. Because symbolism doesn't always have to be functional. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's just human. In the cave of Lafarasi, a child was buried, arms folded, body dusted in ochre, surrounded by stone tools. In Shanidar, Iraq, pollen from ancient flowers surrounded the bones of a Neanderthal male, a bouquet laid tens of thousands of years ago. Not for utility, for grief, for love. For the same reason we leave roses at headstones today. At the cave of Bruniquel in southern France, 175,000 years ago, something astonishing happened. Deep inside the earth, 1,000 feet from sunlight, Neanderthals built something, not a shelter, not a trap, not a hearth, a circle, made of broken stalagmites stacked carefully, arranged deliberately, burned in places. Blackened tips show fire was used, maybe for light, maybe for ritual. The cave was pitch black, silent as death. Whatever they were doing down there, they meant it. Then there's the flute, found in Slovenia, a cave bear femur, hollow, perforated. Holes placed precisely where fingers would go. It plays a scale. We've reconstructed it, played it, heard the sound. It weeps, not accident, not gnaw marks, not damage. A musical instrument 60,000 years old. Long before we thought Neanderthals had music, they had made something that sang. Imagine it. A child falls asleep beside the fire. Outside, the ice howls. Inside, a mother hums a tune, and from the shadows an elder raises a bone flute to his lips, and the sound cuts through this cold like a memory. We've tried to strip them of this, dismissed them as imitation humans, call them copycats, accidental artists. But the evidence keeps piling up. Not just survival, not just intelligence, but intention. They didn't just bury their dead, they prepared them. They didn't just colour their bodies, they painted them. They didn't just scrape bone, they carved symbols. Patterns on cave walls, geometric shapes, chevron marks, etched into stone tools and antler and ivory. A language, a code. We don't know, but the desire to record, to leave a mark is there. The same drive that led us to write, to tattoo, to build cathedrals. Why does this matter? Because it shatters the myth of Neanderthal mindlessness. Because it means they felt more than fear. They dreamed more than fire and meat. They looked at a predator's claw and saw a necklace. They looked at a pigment and saw a symbol. They looked at a child's death and felt something deep enough to bury it in flowers. In 2021, researchers discovered that Neanderthals might have used feathers for decoration, not for warmth, not for function, but because they looked beautiful. Raven feathers, eagle feathers, dyed and plucked. They chose black. They chose shine. And if you think that doesn't matter, try telling that to a teenager choosing their outfit for the first day of school. Style is ancient. Self-expression is eternal. Even their tools speak art. The flint knives weren't just sharp, they were symmetrical, shaped to mirror both sides, ergonomic, efficient, but also elegant. They didn't need to be beautiful, but they were, which means they wanted them to be. Neanderthal creativity wasn't an accident. It was a revelation, proof that even in a world of predators, starvation, and cold so deep it cracked bone, all humans found ways to make meaning, to tell stories, to mourn, to celebrate, to decorate the body, the home, the dead. And that's the most human thing of all. You can measure a species by its tools, but you know its soul by its art. And Neanderthals? They carved it into stone, painted it in ochre, wore it around their necks, sang it to their children. They weren't just survivors. They were artists. They weren't just beasts. They were beings. They weren't just ancestors. They were people. People who, like us, wanted to feel something more than cold, wanted to express something more than hunger, wanted to leave something behind that said, "We were here." The other humans arrive. The first time they saw them, it was at a distance. Thin silhouettes moving through the mist, taller than the hunters expected, strange in shape with long limbs and lighter frames. Not Neanderthal, not animal, something else. Their fire was small, their language soft, their movements quick. They came from the south, and everything about them was unfamiliar, the way they carried their spears, the tools they used, even the shape of their faces. Gorak squinted through the sleet, not prey, not predator, other. And everything was about to change. For 400,000 years, Neanderthals ruled Ice Age Europe. They endured every horror nature threw at them: volcanic winters, saber-toothed ambushes, mammoth stampedes, glacier winds sharp enough to peel flesh. They had perfected survival. But survival isn't a contest against the world. It's a contest against time. And time had sent a challenger. Homo sapiens. Anatomically modern humans. They were us, but not like us. Not yet. When they began their slow migration out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, they were just another experiment in humanity, one of many hominin species that had walked the earth. But unlike the others, these slender strangers carried something no Ice Age species had ever seen before: numbers, innovation, and speed. They didn't march into Europe as conquerors. They drifted in like snow, quietly, softly, over centuries. By 45,000 years ago, they were in Italy. By 42,000 in France. By 40,000 in the British Isles. And everywhere they went, Neanderthals vanished. Not instantly. Not in fire and blood. But like a shadow chased by dawn. So what happened? Was there war, murder, massacre, or something more complicated? At first, the archaeological record is quiet. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted for thousands of years, sometimes in neighbouring valleys, sometimes in the same cave layers of tools from both species stacked like pages of a history book. They may have traded. They may have taught each other. They almost certainly mated. We carry the proof in our blood. Today, 1% to 4% of the DNA in people of European, Asian, and indigenous American descent is Neanderthal. It's in your skin's reaction to sunlight, in how your immune system fights viruses, in the way your brain processes emotion and pain. They didn't just vanish. They became part of us. But cooperation has limits, especially when resources run dry, especially when two predators want the same prey, especially when one has lived here for 400,000 years and the other moves faster, breeds faster, adapts faster. Let's talk about the differences. Neanderthals were cold-adapted tanks, short, broad, immensely strong. Their lungs were huge, their arms thick, their bones dense enough to break modern surgical saws. They lived close to their prey, hunted in intimate ambushes, relied on passed-down memory, stable home ranges, and the wisdom of elders. Homo sapiens were different. They were long-distance runners, not sprinters. Lighter frames, longer legs, less brute force, more endurance. Where Neanderthals had strength, sapiens had strategy. They were better at planning ahead, creating complex tools, organizing larger groups. Telling stories. They carried with them something invisible and unstoppable. Culture. When Homo sapiens arrived, they brought art that exploded with complexity, not just symbolic scratches, but full-blown murals. They brought tools made from bone, antler, ivory, versatile and varied. They invented the atlatl, a spear thrower that let them strike prey from a distance Neanderthals never imagined. And when mammoths vanished, sapiens didn't follow them to extinction. They shifted diets, trapped smaller game fished, gathered shellfish, ground seeds. They had Plan B. Neanderthals never did. But not because they were stupid. Because their world had never required it. They were perfectly adapted to one environment, and evolution had tuned them so precisely that when the Ice Age wobbled, their perfection became a prison. Climate was changing. The animals were moving. The plants were shifting. And suddenly the land that had sustained them for hundreds of millennia was no longer predictable. Into that chaos walked Homo sapiens strangers. Yes, but flexible, curious, relentlessly innovative. At first there were encounters, a distant wave, a shared fire, a glance across the valley, and then competition. Imagine it. Two bands spot the same herd of reindeer. One stalks with stealth, moving low, flint spears tight in their fists. The other circles wide, communicating with gestures, setting a trap using projectiles to scatter and drive. The reindeer flee, but only one group leaves with meat. That difference, repeated thousands of times, isn't just about calories. It's about survival. Did they fight? Almost certainly. Stone tools are found embedded in Neanderthal bones. Some skulls show blunt force trauma. Weapons left behind look less like hunting gear, more like war. But this wasn't a genocide. It was a slow bleed. 1,000 tiny losses that added up to extinction. And perhaps most devastating of all, Homo sapiens had more children. They weaned earlier, raised offspring faster, formed larger social groups with more support. Where a Neanderthal woman needed 5,000 calories a day while nursing and sometimes lost children to starvation, a sapiens mother might be cared for by sisters, aunts, grandmothers, alloparenting. The tribe raised the child survived. And the species grew. In France, a Neanderthal skeleton was found, bones fused with age, joints swollen with arthritis. He was 40. To reach that age in the Ice Age meant one thing: he was protected. But when protection breaks down, so does the species. By 39,000 years ago, the Neanderthal range had collapsed. Gone from Germany, gone from France, gone from the north. By 30,000 years ago, only a few pockets remained. Gibraltar, the Caucasus, refuges surrounded by new humans, new tools, new stories. Then, silence. The last hearth extinguished, the last child buried, the last woman looking out across the sea alone. But they didn't vanish completely, because some stayed. Not in flesh, but in genes. Not in caves, but in memory. We didn't conquer them. We absorbed them. And what began as competition ended in something far more complicated. Inheritance. They were not destroyed. They were woven in. Today, when your body fights a virus, when your skin toughens in the sun, when your hands grip a stone with instinct, you're not alone. The echo is there. A whisper from 40,000 years ago. I was here before you. And in a way, they still are. Love or war, They met under grey skies, at a river crossing, or in the shelter of a storm, or beside a shared fire in a starving winter. We don't know where, we don't know how, but we know this. It changed everything. Because when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals first locked eyes, it wasn't just a meeting between two tribes, it was a collision between species, and what followed wasn't clean. It wasn't one thing. It was everything: curiosity, fear, trade, theft, sex, murder. We were them, they were us. And for a brief moment in time, the line between love and war vanished. We carry the proof in our blood. If you're of European, Asian, or indigenous American descent, then somewhere in your DNA right now is Neanderthal code not fossilized, not ancient, active, alive, genes that help regulate your immune response, genes that affect how your skin reacts to sunlight, genes tied to fertility, even depression. You are on average 1% to 4% Neanderthal. That's not poetic. That's genetic fact. So the question isn't did we mix, it's how often, how much, and why. Let's talk about sex, not romance, not passion, biology. The earliest signs of interbreeding go back at least 60,000 years just before modern humans began their long march into Ice Age Europe. It didn't take long. Within a few generations, Neanderthal DNA began weaving into the Homo sapiens genome. We know this not because of tools or bones, but because of a 50,000-year-old pinky finger found in a Siberian cave, the Denisova Cave. There, scientists uncovered something shocking. Not just Neanderthal DNA, not just Homo sapiens DNA, but a hybrid, a first-generation child. Mother, Neanderthal. Father, Denisovan, a third archaic human species. This wasn't a one-off. It happened again and again across thousands of years and miles. A complicated, messy web of contact, not sterile extinction, entanglement. But here's where the story darkens. Because while DNA tells us who slept with whom, it also tells us something more uncomfortable. Not all unions were equal. There's a mystery hidden in the genes. Today we carry Neanderthal DNA on chromosome 12 related to immunity. We carry it on chromosome 3 linked to fat metabolism. We carry it on chromosome 7 affecting scent receptors. But you know where we don't carry it? The Y chromosome. Neanderthal male lineages vanished. That's not chance. It suggests something chilling. Homo sapiens. Males may have fathered children with Neanderthal females, but Neanderthal males didn't father children with sapiens women. Or if they did, the offspring didn't survive. Why? Biological incompatibility? Cultural taboo? Or was it something far worse? Was this love? Or was it violence? When two species meet in the wild, especially predators, they don't usually shake hands. They test, they clash, they fight. And when food is scarce, territory tight, and winter's cruel desperation changes everything. Some anthropologists believe the interbreeding wasn't mutual, that many Neanderthal sapiens pairings were acts of coercion, not courtship. We can't prove it. But we also can't ignore the asymmetry, a pattern where our species benefits and theirs vanishes. That's not just genetics, that's power. But war leaves scars deeper than DNA. Some Neanderthal remains show weapon wounds that match Homo sapiens tool patterns. Others bear butchery marks suggesting starvation-era cannibalism not by their own kind, but by us. A jawbone cracked open for marrow, a femur stripped clean. Was it necessity? Was it ritual? Or was it conquest? We didn't have to hate them, but we outnumbered them, outcompeted them, outlasted them. And over time, that may have been enough. You don't need mass slaughter to erase a species. All it takes is a higher birth rate, a broader diet, a faster pace, and just enough interbreeding to absorb the useful traits and leave the rest behind. A slow extinction. Archaeologist Zhuao Hao puts it simply, we didn't wipe them out in a blitzkrieg, we absorbed them. But that's a cold way to describe what may have been the most complex relationship in human history. Because if you could travel back to 40,000 years ago, you wouldn't see Neanderthals as monsters. You'd see a woman pregnant with a hybrid child kneeling at a fire, a Neanderthal elder teaching a sapiens boy how to shape flint, a dispute over a hunting ground erupting in stone and blood, and over generations. The line blurs. They live with us. They hunt with us. They vanish into us. Today, the evidence continues to surprise us. Some populations in Oceania carry traces of Denisovan ancestry. Some East Asians have more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans. Even isolated genomes like that of a 40,000-year-old modern human from Romania show signs of recent Neanderthal ancestry, as recent as 4 to 6 generations back. A Neanderthal great-great-grandparent. Let that sink in. We didn't simply destroy them. We merged with them, but the merging was not equal, not fair, not clean. It was complicated, messy, human. So love or war? Yes, it was both. Because we are both. We are the children of tenderness and the offspring of violence. We inherit the flint and the fire, the embrace and the blade, the warmth of a shared hearth and the cold calculation of survival. The last Neanderthal may have looked at her child half her, and half something new and known what was coming, that her kind was fading, that the child might live but her people would not. And still she held the baby close, because that's what humans do even before we knew what we were. Today, when you look in the mirror, when you take a deep breath of cold air, when you feel your jaw tighten under stress, when your skin burns in the sun, when your immune system fights off an infection, you're not just looking at a Homo sapiens. You're looking at a story written in blood, etched in chromosomes, a story of love, of war, of survival, and of what happens when two species become one, a world that slipped away. It didn't start with war, or a death, or a scream in the snow. It started with a shift in the wind, subtle, silent, but unstoppable. The world they had conquered with spears, fire, and sheer endurance began to change. Not in a moment, not in a catastrophe, but in 1,000 small betrayals. The grass didn't return as thick in spring, the berries ripened later or not at all. The mammoth herds didn't pass through the old valley. Or if they did, they moved faster, spooked by unfamiliar scents. The glaciers were melting, then advancing again. Rain became snow, snow became ice. Then came the volcanic ash blocking out the sun. The world of the Neanderthals, the one they'd mastered for 400,000 years, was slipping through their fingers, and they didn't know why. The cold gets colder. You'd think Neanderthals would thrive in the cold. And for a long time they did. They were built for it. Their bodies were furnaces, their lungs air filters, their blood thick with oxygen. But even for Ice Age champions, there's a limit. At times, the temperature across Europe dropped to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Entire forests died. Grasslands turned to tundra. Rivers froze mid-current. Animals migrated south, seeking warmth, or died. With them went the Neanderthals' food, their leather, their tools, their survival. In caves from France to Georgia, archaeologists find the same silent story. Layers of ash, abandoned hearths, fewer tools, fewer bones, and then nothing. Neanderthals were being pushed out not by war, but by a world that no longer wanted them. Starvation makes strangers of neighbours. Imagine waking to a cave of silence. Your hunting party hasn't returned. Your child's face is gaunt. Your mate's spear hand trembles from hunger. You chew on boiled bark, scrape marrow from old bones, pray the mammoths will return. They don't. Now imagine you see smoke across the ridge. Not your clan, not your fire. Strangers. Tall, slender, different. Homo sapiens. They have meat. They have children who are laughing. They are thriving where your people are dying. What do you feel? Hope? Or something darker? Outsmarted Homo sapiens weren't stronger. They weren't tougher. They weren't even faster. But they were different. They adapted. Where Neanderthals specialized narrow diets, familiar hunting grounds, deep-rooted traditions, sapiens improvised. They hunted smaller prey when mammoths disappeared. They fished. They made nets. They carved bone needles to stitch tighter clothing. They travelled farther, moved faster, formed larger bands. They had language complex, abstract, faster. And perhaps most crucially, they traded ideas. One group discovered a new way to trap reindeer. Soon, everyone knew. Innovation became contagious. For Neanderthals, knowledge was passed within families taught beside the fire by a mother to her child. For sapiens, knowledge became communal crossing rivers, mountains and generations, and in a world falling apart, adaptability was everything. The collapse begins. Between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals began to vanish. First in the north, where the cold hit hardest. Then in the east, where rival species arrived first. Then, slowly, everywhere. Some lasted longer pockets in Italy, the Caucasus, the Altai Mountains. But the pressure mounted. Food growing scarce. Territories shrinking, populations thinning, sapiens expanding. The last Neanderthals weren't defeated in battle. They were starved, outbred and isolated. The bones tell the story. They grew smaller, more fragile. Teeth show malnutrition. Injuries went untreated. Infants died younger. Even their art, once proud, bright, full of ochre and symbols, faded into nothing. Cannibal winter. In one cave in southern France, archaeologists found butchered Neanderthal remains, cut marks, marrow extraction, skulls split open. Not enemies, not sapiens. Their own kind, a last resort. A season where the ice didn't thaw, where the berries didn't bloom, where the baby wouldn't stop crying, until she did. And the clan made the unthinkable choice. They did what they had to. Because the world had stopped caring. The younger, the weaker, the fewer geneticists say that by 40,000 years ago, the entire Neanderthal population of Europe may have fallen below 5,000 individuals. That's fewer than a small town, spread across a frozen continent. Compare that to sapiens spreading like fire across the globe, 10 times their numbers, twice the birth rate. Even if no war ever came, even if no sapiens ever raised a spear, the math was brutal. Small groups are fragile. One bad season, one epidemic, one volcanic winter, and a family line is gone forever. Multiply that by thousands of years, and the strongest species Earth had ever seen was being erased by time and tide. A last light. In Gibraltar, on cliffs rising above a now vanished shoreline, the last Neanderthals stood watch. For a while the environment spared them. Milder winters, steady shellfish, less competition. They built fires, painted walls, buried their dead. But they were alone. Their cousins were gone. The mammoths had moved on, and one by one so did they. The last known Neanderthal hearth in Gibraltar is 28,000 years old. When the coals went cold, so did a chapter in Earth's history. A chapter written in fire, ash, and blood. But not forgotten. They didn't leave cities. No temples, no scrolls. Just flint and bone, ash and charcoal. A broken tooth. A woman's skeleton in a cave. A strand of DNA in your blood. But their story isn't one of failure or defeat. It's a story of resilience that lasted 400,000 years. A story of adaptation that almost conquered an entire continent. A story of loss that echoes in the marrow of modern humans. Because their worlds slipped away, but not before leaving footprints in ours. In your lungs, in your immune system, in how your skin handles winter sun, in how your body stores fat for the cold. The world that made them helped shape you. So the next time winter bites harder than expected, when you feel the ancient chill settle deep in your bones, it's not just the weather, It's memory, Neanderthal memory, of a world that froze, of a people who didn't quit until they had nothing left. Not even the ground beneath their feet. The immortal bloodline. The fire died. The last spear broke. The final song was sung to no one, and for a while it seemed they were gone. The Neanderthals, giant killers, mammoth hunters, firekeepers, cave painters vanished into the ice. No empires, no graves marked with names, just wind through empty valleys and bones buried beneath centuries of earth. But extinction isn't always erasure, and sometimes a people can disappear from the world while still living in its children. What the genome remembered. It began with a single tooth, buried in a Croatian cave, browned with time, cracked by centuries, yet inside it a secret waited, curled like a ghost in the spiral of DNA. In 2010, geneticists cracked the Neanderthal genome, and what they found changed everything. Neanderthals weren't an evolutionary dead end. They weren't our primitive cousins. They were our family. You carry their blood. If your ancestry traces to Europe, Asia, or the Americas, between 1% to 4% of your DNA is Neanderthal. That number doesn't sound like much, but it's enough. Enough to shape your body, enough to steer your brain, enough to whisper in the immune cells that fight your colds and the pain receptors that wince at cold wind. Enough to mean this: they didn't vanish. They became part of us. The gifts we didn't know we had. Start with your skin. Neanderthals lived under grey ice age skies, perpetual twilight, low UV, endless winters. Their skin adapted, less melanin, more absorption. Their genes helped them pull vitamin D from scarce sunlight. Modern humans came from Africa, built for bright sun and high UV. When the two groups mixed, that ancient skin logic fused in us. Today, some people's skin reacts more strongly to sunburn. Others process sunlight more efficiently. The difference isn't random, it's Neanderthal. Then there's your immune system. Neanderthals lived with wolves, with saber-toothed cats, with rot and raw meat, with wounds and filth and parasites that would cripple us. They didn't have antibiotics, they had genetics. Their immune genes were hardened in fire, an arsenal of antibodies tuned for a brutal world. And when Homo sapiens arrived from the warm plains of Africa, those immune genes were a gift today. Some of your immune responses to viruses, to allergens, to infection carry Neanderthal signatures. They helped us survive new plagues. They still help us fight off flu, pneumonia, even COVID. Not bad for a people long thought extinct. Pain, emotion and memory. But the inheritance wasn't just physical. Some Neanderthal genes affect how we process pain. That heightened sensitivity to cold, the sharp response to injury, even your risk for chronic pain disorders, all traceable to Neanderthal variants. Some scientists believe these traits helped them survive because pain, in a world of danger, meant action. You feel pain sooner, move faster, escape quicker. But in a modern world of comfort and medicine, those same genes can make some suffer more. It's evolution with a long tail, a reminder that nothing comes free. More surprisingly, some Neanderthal genes touch the brain. Researchers have found links between Neanderthal DNA and sleep patterns, mood regulation, depression, risk, nicotine addiction, schizophrenia, social behavior. Does that mean Neanderthals were moody loners? Not necessarily, but it suggests their neurology was different, built for a different world. A colder one, a quieter one. A world where hyper-alertness, suspicion, and solitary behavior might mean the difference between seeing the predator or being seen by it. The heart of the matter. We didn't just kill them, we loved them. That's what the DNA says, because the genes we carry didn't come from conquest. They came from intimacy. Interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens wasn't fluke. It happened many times, across thousands of years, across continents, Not one meeting, but hundreds, thousands. Some were violent, some were gentle, some were stories lost in the wind, but they left a mark in your blood, in your face, in the way your lungs fill in winter air, memory in the bone. We've always known memory is more than what the mind recalls. It's in the body, in the instincts, in the dreams that come from nowhere. Some say Neanderthal genes influence our creativity, a deep emotional core that shaped music, myth, and magic. They painted, they carved, they may have mourned the dead, they may have sung, the first flute's hollow bones shaped by Neanderthal hands, eagle talon pendants worn not for utility but meaning, ochre-stained walls still glowing after 40,000 years. What is that, if not the soul trying to speak? And if we feel something in our bones when we stand in a cave lit by firelight, maybe it's not nostalgia. Maybe it's recognition. They are the ghost in the machine. For centuries we mocked them. Stupid cavemen. Brutes with clubs. Failures. But the science now tells a different story. They were master hunters, fire engineers, early chemists, healers, mothers, fathers, singers, survivors. And when their time came to fade, they didn't vanish. They did what survivors always do. They adapted. They joined us. And now, in a strange twist of fate, we are the ones keeping their story alive. Through data, through memory, through DNA curled in every cell. Not dead, just changed. Their world ended. But their code? It still runs. In lungs that breathe easier at high altitudes. In skin that adjusts to light. In brains wired for endurance, suspicion, or firelight dreams. They are the whisper behind the wind, the echo in your instincts, the flicker in your genes. We are not alone in our humanity. We never were. We are a fusion, a mosaic, a living fossil, a monument to a species that refused to quit even when the cold came and the stars grew dim. So the next time you fight off a flu without knowing how, the next time winter calls you to light a fire and stare into the coals, the next time you feel strength you didn't know you had, remember, you're not just human, you're something older, something tougher, something that refused to die. You're the immortal bloodline born in the ice, raised by the flame, carried forward by will, and in you Neanderthals still walk the earth.